Dr. Plyer liked working for the Foundation. He knew that some didn't, those with less savory jobs than his. And sure, there was always the threat of being ripped apart by a rogue SCP, but at least it was never boring. In his personal opinion, the worst part, other than the getting killed thing, was getting up at 6 in the morning every day.
Like I should be doing right now,
he mumbled to himself, trying to ignore the beeping coming from the side of his bed. He slapped his standard issue alarm clock and rolled out of bed in a less than graceful manner. He went over to his bathroom and, after a quick shower and brushing his teeth, got dressed and went out into the mess hall. Walking across the room to the coffee maker, he spotted his assistant researcher, Dr. Natsuki, already sitting at one of the tables, her pink hair a stark contrast to the drab gray walls of the facility. After grabbing whatever food they were serving today, pancakes from the look of it, and a cup of coffee, he joined her at the table. "Morning, Mark," she yawned. "Glad to see you could join us on time today," she said, humor in her voice. He sighed.
"One time, Natsuki, and it was because my alarm clock broke."
Of course, she knew this, but they have had this discussion many times before. But she never passed up a chance to tease him on it. They continued to make small talk until breakfast was finished, but it was distinctively less cheerful than usual. Ever since Dr. Plyer had discovered the problem, gloom had hung over the entire facility. Looking around, Mark could feel it even now, with the bright morning sunlight streaming through the facility. People were talking quieter than normal, as if not to draw attention to themselves, and the guards shifted nervously and held tightly to their guns. With a sigh, Mark took the last bite of pancakes and stood up, with Natsuki following his lead.
"Shall we go, then?"
he asked his assistant, who nodded and followed him to the monitoring room. He swiped his keycard to open the door and, spotting an empty terminal, sat down at it with Natsuki hovering behind him. Turning on a monitor in front of him, he quickly flipped to the heat map of SCP-8364. Gazing at the screen, he saw the thing that had been on everyone's mind, especially his. There were more of them. When SCP-8364 had first been discovered and Dr. Plyer had written its documents, there had been around 14,000 people living in it. But now, looking at the heat map, there were about 19,000 glowing dots on it. That on its own was worrying, but to make matters worse, when the Foundation had first come here, there had only been about 20 SCPs of significant threat. But recent surveys showed that their numbers were growing as well, with estimations saying around 100, possibly more. And as a cherry on top of this already terrifying cake, the SCPs didn't even have similar abilities that would make them easy to contain in a one-size-fits-all plan. Dr. Plyer had requested, and been approved, for more security, but he was worried that even that wouldn't be enough if the subjects all decided to attack at once. "Well, Mark, what do you think we should do?" Natsuki's question broke him out of his train of thought. She was worried, although she did a pretty good job of not showing it. She was tough. You had to be to work for the Foundation, and although Mark knew she was constantly worried, she very rarely showed it. He sighed, and she instantly knew what he was thinking. "I cannot believe you're thinking that right now," she said, glaring at him.
"Do you have a better idea?" Mark said, "because trust me, if you do, I'm all ears."
"It's suicide to go in there," she shook her head. When Dr. Plyer had presented his idea to talk with SCP-8364-1 and figure out what was going on, Natsuki had been one of the most outspoken against it, but she had failed to come up with a different plan when he challenged her to. After waiting a moment and watching her struggle to come up with something better, Mark got up.
"Come on, we've got to start making preparations,"
he said, leaving the room with a furious assistant researcher behind him. Dr. Plyer and assistant researcher Natsuki stood outside the gate entrance to SCP-8364, waiting for the guards to open it. "And she has powerful memetic abilities, don't forget that." Natsuki had been talking about SCP-8364-1 and the dangers she posed for the better part of the hour it took Mark to get ready. He already knew everything she was saying, of course. He had, after all, written the reports, but he knew it was her way of dealing with nerves, so he let her talk. Finally, the doors were open enough to walk through, and as he passed through to the other side, he saw SCP-8364-1 already standing there, a smile on her face and several sniper dots on her torso, ready to trank her at a moment's notice. She was pretty, he thought to himself, the same way a nuclear explosion is pretty, with her green eyes and blonde hair, adorned in her usual dark green robe. "Dr. Plyer, I'm glad you decided to come visit us. I don't think we have ever properly met before. Call me Hedgehog." She stuck out her hand, which he shook with a bit of trepidation, but nothing happened. "And a pleasure to see you again as well, Miss Natsuki," Hedgehog called out to the researcher, smiling. She attempted to smile back, and almost succeeded. Come, let me show you around. We have a lot to talk about, don't we?" Hedgehog said to Mark, putting her elbow through his as if they were a couple at a ball, much to the chagrin of Natsuki. Yes, we do, he said, playing along. With a final glance back at Natsuki, Mark allowed her to lead him into the town, with the gates closing behind them. Due to the presence of SCP-8315, only the most specialized cameras functioned within Edie Valley, which meant that Mark had to mostly rely on heat images from satellites. A side effect of this led to the Foundation knowing about how many people were in SCP-8364, but not about what they looked like. But now, walking through the town, Mark realized that the Foundation, along with himself, had vastly underestimated how many SCPs were in the town, with the amount possibly being up to 200. Hedgehog led him past a large workshop, the walls of which were covered in strange drawings of things Mark didn't recognize. Inside, he could see a man wielding what looked like a giant pencil at an anvil, with a humanoid red lizard in a suit and top hat saying something to him. Mark couldn't quite make out what they were talking about, but noted that the lizard's voice was much deeper than should have been humanely possible. On the other side of the street, what appeared to be a Sesame Street-like duck puppet walked by, apparently able to support itself, having a conversation about the viability of World War II-era planes with a young girl. A boy dressed up as a young girl, who was using language far too advanced for the age they appeared to be. Dr. Plier subtly pointed the specialty camera that was hidden inside his shirt at them, hoping he was getting a good shot for review later. Hedgehog saw him looking at them and smiled. Cute, aren't they? Always talking about war, it's adorable. At this, the pair noticed Hedgehog walking by and bowed, saying, High Priestess, greetings, which she dismissed with a wave of her hand. Come on, if we don't leave, they'll never stop. She whispered to Mark, leading him down the street. After a bit of walking, they turned the corner and saw their destination, the church in the middle of the town. However, in their way, smack in the middle of the street, was a red rotary phone on a pedestal, seemingly not connected to anything. Next to it, a man who appeared to be entirely gray and wearing all gray clothing stared at it, not acknowledging the two of them. With a start, Mark realized that the street was entirely empty, except for him, Hedgehog, and the gray man, with the buildings lining the street empty and boarded shut. Shh, Hedgehog whispered to Mark. Don't disturb him, he's expecting a call. Come this way. She led him down a side alley that twisted and turned on itself in a way that physics would probably disagree with. Rounding a corner, he heard a loud squeak at his feet, and looking down, he saw a gerbil shaking its tiny fist at him. That thing looks upset with you, Hedgehog remarked, smiling to herself. Of course, I would be upset too if someone almost stepped on me. Leaving the rodent to its rage, they turned another corner and finally reached the end of the alleyway, which was somehow right in front of the church. And here we are, just in time for the meeting to start. She opened the impressively large doors to the holy building and entered. He followed her, fully aware that the camera on his person had stopped working, and the fact that he was now fully alone with the SCP. The building was spacious, with a high roof and giant stained glass windows, but Hedgehog paid it no mind as she walked to the side door off to the left of the main entrance. Following her, Mark saw that the door opened into a staircase that turned at a 90-degree angle, making it impossible to see where it went, although prior research told him it was probably the basement. Hedgehog turned around before entering and asked, You doing okay? You haven't said much on the way here. Mark was surprised that she asked. She never showed much compassion for anyone outside of her cult. Yes, I'm fine, just, taking it all in, I guess. She nodded. I understand. But don't get overwhelmed yet, we still have a meeting to get to. She smiled. Don't worry about me, I've seen far stranger, Mark said as he followed her down the stairs, not entirely convinced he had. Exiting the staircase into the church's basement, Mark saw a long, rectangular wood table in the middle of the room, occupied by what he presumed was the High Council of SCP-8364. There were no windows, and only one light in the form of a large, ornate chandelier hanging several feet above the table, surprisingly bright for the cult's main meeting place. Looking at the council, Dr. Plier saw SCPs he was both familiar with, and some he didn't recognize. Near the head of the table was SCPs 8333 and 8315, with the former complaining to the latter that his wings were too big for them to keep meeting in the basement, while SCP-8315 nodded along, a barely audible hum coming from him. Next to 8333 was a horrific mouse-human hybrid with limbs in all the wrong places and a large 391 burned at the side of its head. It was talking to what appeared to be a poorly disguised robot across the table from it, whose skin was a strange pearly white. Listening, Mark tuned into their conversation. Full team wipe, it was awful, the mouse thing said to the robot, who nodded and responded with a series of noises that sounded like gears clicking together. The mouse thing turned to look at the perfectly normal person who was resting their head on the table beside it. What do you think, Noah? The man, whose name was apparently Noah, didn't move. I think he died again, 8315 said across the table to the mouse thing, who sighed. And right when we were about to start, so rude, the figure across from Noah said. Looking at it, Mark had thought at first it was a woman in a large, fluffy dress, but looking again realized that she was flickering, and underneath her was a man in a top hat and suit, as if he was in a hologram. At the end of the table, nearest to where Mark had entered, the last 2 chairs were empty, with no chair at the foot of the table. Hedgehog walked to the head of the table and sat down there, gesturing for Mark to take a seat. He walked over to the nearest chair and was about to sit down when he heard a loud "No!" coming from everyone at the table. Startled, he quickly moved back from the chair and looked at the council, who were all staring at him. "That seat is reserved for Alamis," Hedgehog explained. The robot clicked something, assumably in agreement.
"You can sit at the other one,"
8333 said, pointing. Mark quickly moved over there and sat next to the hologram person, who looked at him curiously. "Now that we are all here, let's begin," Hedgehog said. Mark didn't understand how everyone was here. This Alamis person's chair was still empty, but he didn't dare say anything, not here at the Council of Beings with unknown abilities and tempers. "Let's get straight to the point, all right? We are all here to talk to you, Dr. Plyer." Hedgehog turned to him. "You said, or rather, the guard who talked to James said that you wish to ask us some questions." Mark hid his nervousness, something he was rather good at.
"Yes, we at the SCP Foundation have noticed that SCP-8364, or as you call it, Edie Valley, has been growing in occupants rather rapidly."
The mouse thing nodded.
"Yes, isn't it fantastic? More sacrifices!"
Everyone but Mark and Noah, who remained motionless, nodded and agreed with it.
"I'm sorry, sacrifices? You are going to sacrifice your townfolk to, I presume, the Elder Hog?"
"Indeed," SCP-8333 proclaimed.
"We haven't done any big sacrifices yet, only a couple minor ones that we decided with card games, but soon we will have enough to summon the Elder Hog."
"It's going to be fantastic," the hologram person exclaimed. The robot leaned over and said something to Hedgehog, who responded with, "Yes, yes, don't worry about it. I've got it covered." It nodded, seemingly satisfied with the answer.
"And when you do summon this Elder Hog, what will happen?"
Mark asked, terrified of the answer, but needing to know it. "Everyone will worship the Elder Hog or perish," Hedgehog said simply, seemingly unbothered by the implications of such a thing. All thoughts of negotiation had left Mark's mind. This was big. Much bigger than he had previously thought. It sounded like an XK end-of-the-world scenario, and he had to tell the O5 Council as soon as possible so they could come up with a containment plan. But first, he was going to have to get out of here alive. The High Council had yet to show any interest in killing him, but who knew how long the generosity would last. He had to get out. And now.
"So, James,"
he said to SCP-8315, trying to change the topic,
"what do you want those go-karts for?"
He lit up, obviously wanting to talk about it, while everyone but Noah, who still remained motionless, groaned. "Now you've got him going," the hologram person whispered to Mark as SCP-8315 started talking about the big race coming up. After about 10 minutes of SCP-8315 rambling, Hedgehog said, "Enough! Does anyone else have any questions, Dr. Plyer?"
"You all have been very helpful. Thank you. I have no more questions,"
he responded. A lie, of course. He had so many questions it was ridiculous, but right now his number one priority was telling the O5s about this new threat. "In that case, meeting adjourned," Hedgehog said, and everyone got up and started to leave, with the exception of Noah, who was still not moving. With a sigh, the mouse creature picked him up and put him over its shoulder, saying to the robot, "I'm getting really sick of having to carry him around," who clicked back at him. Soon, the only people left in the room were Hedgehog and Mark, who she smiled at. "Shall I escort you to the perimeter, if your job here is done? Or would you rather stay here a little while longer? There is a lot in town to show you, after all." Mark blinked. Was she flirting with him? After saying she was going to destroy the world. While he most certainly did not want to do that, a very small part of him, the part that lived for danger, did think she is rather pretty. But he got rid of that thought fast. This was a Keter-class SCP he was talking to, not a cute girl in the local coffee shop.
Well," he stammered, caught off guard and trying not to show it. "Well, that does sound nice. I really have to report back to my boss. They'll be furious if I don't get back soon."
"That's too bad," she said. "It could have been fun. Oh well, at least allow me to escort you back like a proper host." And with that, she took his elbow in hers once more and led him back out into the town. The walk back was fairly uneventful, only encountering what appeared to be normal people. Hedgehog did most of the talking, pointing out various buildings and what they did, or occasionally what they didn't do, to Mark, who was only half paying attention. He knew he should be. After all, this was important information, but all he could think about was the end of the world and how it seemed to be rapidly approaching. The SCP Foundation dealt with end-of-the-world stuff all the time, but for him this was a first, and it was terrifying him. However, he was doing a pretty decent job of keeping his cool, as all workers of the Foundation had training for this kind of thing. They finally reached the gate to SCP-8364, where Hedgehog stopped. "Well, it has been a blast talking to you, but I suppose you have to go. And anyway, I have stuff to do as well. You know how it is running a town and all that." Mark nodded, but as she turned to leave, he asked, "What time do you plan on having the Elder Hog come?" She turned back to him, smiling. "Oh, you'll know when it's here, Dr. Plyer." And with that, she turned and left, leaving him standing by the gate. After she was out of sight, the guards opened the gate and Mark left, feeling a tiny bit safer to be out of the town. Walking back down the path toward the facility, he saw Dr. Natsuki running towards him. "Oh, thank God you're okay. The camera went out when you entered the church, which was expected, but then we couldn't get it working again, and I'll be honest, I was fearing the—" She saw the expression on his face and stopped. "What happened?" she said, concerned. He kept walking toward the facility, not stopping. "I'll tell you in a moment, but right now get me the phone. I need to call the O5s. We have a situation."